Hello and welcome to the Liverpool.com podcast with me, James Martin. I'm joined today by Matt Addison. Before we start, the usual message from our sponsors, NordVPN. To get the best discount off your NordVPN plan, go to nordvpn.com/bloodred. Our link will also give you 4 extra months on the 2-year plan. There's no risk with Nord's 30-day money-back guarantee. The link is in the podcast episode description box. Right, today we're bringing you the Liverpool.com podcast and we're going to be talking about players to watch ahead of the new season. It's creeping closer, I think. At the time of recording, we might be a month away from that opening fixture against Ipswich. Very exciting. And of course, pre-season fixtures getting underway very soon with the players off to the US before long. So we'll get to see in the flesh what the new era under Arne Slot looks like. But before we've seen anything, just going off what we've seen already from the players, I mean, Matt, what are we thinking about players to watch, which is what we're talking about today? Is who stands out to you as the kind of the players who could be in for a really big season on a personal level?
Yeah, I think there's a few options to talk through. Obviously, we've picked a couple each for this particular show, but I think you could almost make an argument for any of the Liverpool players, given the change of manager. There's different questions to be asked about a few of them. There's obviously different things that might happen potentially in the transfer market moving forwards as well. But like you say, we've kind of gone off what we know of these players at this moment in time, what it might look like under the new manager, and just to make a few predictions. So there's a couple of mine, both happen to be midfielders. Curtis Jones is one that I try and talk about as often as I can. I think he does sort of go under the radar a little bit in terms of just how important he is and how effective he can be within that Liverpool team. So he's the first one really that I wanted to talk a little bit about, because, as I say, I think he's probably underappreciated in a certain in a certain way. I think a few people were maybe wondering how he might fit in if Arne Slot was going to play a 4-2-3-1 system, which obviously in his first press conference, as we've referenced a few times, he quickly debunked that as being the case. And I just think Curtis Jones is so important to the way that Liverpool play when they're at their best. And obviously we don't know exactly the specificities around what Slot is going to do and how that's going to be different from Jurgen Klopp. But I think in terms of broad brushstrokes, we know what we're going to get really from this new Liverpool. And for me, Curtis Jones is absolutely vital in terms of on the ball and off the ball in both aspects. I think he's perfect for what Liverpool want to be and what they should be if they're going to be competing at the very top. So yeah, he was the first name top of my list really in terms of what to look out for this summer.
Yeah, it's an interesting one to pick out, and I'm glad you've chosen him so that we can talk about him, because I think you're right. I think the manner in which he sort of emerged into the team did maybe lend itself to that kind of going under the radar quality. It feels like he's been around for so long now, but it's just he's always been sort of on the cusp of that breakthrough. I suppose you'd probably say that he finally had that last season where he became a regular for a time in what was, pretty much widely accepted as the first choice midfield. But again, not for the first time. Little injuries, badly timed injuries, and often freak injuries as well. I mean, I remember in the past he had that eye problem, didn't he? Just when it looked like he was primed to make a bit of a breakthrough. So he suffered from some odd complaints. And I suppose, as well as being one to watch, do you see it as maybe almost a make or break season for him in terms of either sort of building on that foundation of last season or kind of slipping back away from the first team again?
I don't necessarily think it's make or break in terms of him being at Liverpool. I think there's more than enough evidence there to think that he can be a player. I think probably around 12, 18 months ago, we were having conversations of, is he going to be, one of the first names on the team sheet for Liverpool? Is he going to make himself a real, first 11 player? And maybe at that point, I was thinking more that he might be someone who can play a couple of different positions, be really useful in the squad. Obviously, he's homegrown, which is a big advantage. It feels to me like there's clearly a career for him at Liverpool. That's been the case all along, really. It's just been, where is he going to establish himself in that pecking order? I think, like you're right to mention the injury. I think that there's been probably 3, 4, 5 different injuries at inopportune moments for him. He obviously has a bit of a spell out of the team last season as well, which didn't help. But if everyone's fully fit and everyone is kind of, broadly speaking, in the form that you'd expect them to be in, I think there's no better option really for Liverpool on that left of the three in midfield. Obviously, Alexis McAllister can play there as well, and we can have a conversations about where he should play all day long. But I think for me, in terms of what Jones offers in terms of keeping hold of the ball and what we discussed last week, really, the way that Liverpool need that midfield to be in control of things. If Liverpool can pen in an opponent, that's when Liverpool are at the best. We mentioned the Aston Villa game last season. That was one of those games, really, where Curtis Jones was very, very good at not only keeping the ball, but if they lose it, he's very good at winning it back. He's become so much more of a rounded midfielder. So I think the interesting thing for me, really, is can he take another step forward? Even if he stays at the same level, it's then a case of, can he be consistently fit and injury-free and be in the team for a sustained period of time? I think, for me, he's head and shoulders above the likes of Ryan Gravenberch, who would probably play in that position if it wasn't for him. Obviously, McAllister, it depends a little bit what happens a bit deeper in the midfield. Szoboszlai can play that side, but it's probably better on the other side, and the same for Harvey Elliott as well. So Liverpool have got loads of midfield options, but Curtis Jones, for me, the way that he's developed and the player that he's become, if he's fit and he can have a full summer of, sustained training with Arne Slot, he's obviously been in since pretty much day one of pre-season. So for me, he would be in 100% in that team against Ipswich. As you say, as we record this a month today, the countdown is on, and I think he would definitely be in my team if he is fit and ready to go.
Yeah, I think as well, one of the things that maybe gets overlooked is the advantage of him having been around for so long is that he is now an experienced player. I mean, still quite young, but in terms of being around the team, I mean, in the past you'd have said learning how Klopp likes to play, how Liverpool likes to play. Of course, there's a new manager, but I think even a new manager, I think Arne Slot would appreciate a player who's essentially been moulded into the exact midfielder that Klopp liked to use, because we know that Liverpool targeted a coach with sort of similar philosophies, similar kind of pressing ideas. So to have that sort of ready-made package, if you like, of all the things you've mentioned, really, of ball retention, of progression, of pressing, it's an appealing option to have in midfield. You don't ever want to go sort of too carried away in terms of the stats, but you look at something like an FB Ref and you look at his profile there and you think, wow, if Liverpool sign someone like this, then that would be quite the coup, because he really does stand out in a lot of diverse areas. I suppose my fear with Jones, and it's possibly unfair because, as I mentioned, some of those injuries have been completely sort of bizarre accidents. They haven't all been muscular or anything like that, so we can't read too much into them. But it's just one of them where in midfield, Liverpool have had a couple of midfielders, haven't they, which have seemed almost too good to be true when fit. You look at Thiago, who of course could hardly get on the pitch in the last 18 months. You go back to Naby Keita as well, who seemed to be the dream Klopp midfielder, and it all just proved too much for their bodies to take, really, in a way, with the intensity of it. Is that a worry you have about Jones, or do you think that's we've not seen enough to sort of fear that just yet?
Yeah, I wouldn't say I was concerned too much at this moment in time, but I think it's similar to the conversations that we've had in all of these positions, really, is that you don't want to get into a situation where all of the other midfielders are injured, so he's having to play every minute of every game. It's just a case of being sensible, really. All the talk around Arne Slot at Feyenoord and the staff and the people that he's brought with him, the idea is that he's very, very good at sort of injury prevention and knowing how many minutes each player can play before breaking points and things like that. You'd like to think that the science and the technology behind it can mean that, generally speaking, Liverpool can keep themselves as a group fitter and healthier across the course of a season. That's obviously been a problem for him and for several others as well. But I think the fact that they've got enough midfielders now, it's not like last summer where they needed to go out and buy 4 players. They've got those players in now. You'd like to think that someone like Gravenberch and Szoboszlai, that we're going to talk about a little bit later, they can take that next step and play a little bit more consistently as well. It just feels to me like you need to take care of him and rotate him. And, even if it's a case of playing, one game and then somebody else comes in for the next, I think that is going to be a theme, really, of the next few years as we come to get used to this new sort of way of playing so many matches. I know I mention it on every single podcast, but the Champions League is just going to be ridiculous next season. The number of games, each of those games is going to matter more. You are going to need a lot more rotation. So Liverpool are going to have to be sensible with all of these players, but you just hope that they've got enough options in there and they make the right decisions across the course of this summer to make sure that Curtis Jones can play the ideal number of minutes rather than having to be forced into more injuries and more inconsistency in that front.
Which probably leads us quite nicely into my first one to watch, because it is another midfielder, not necessarily one in the exact same role, but maybe one who could play there, and that's Harvey Elliott. I was saying to you before we jumped on that it feels like he's almost been one to watch for the last 2 or 3 seasons, but I suppose in a way similar to Jones, it's a bit different because he has kind of had that breakthrough, but it just seems like with Elliott, there keeps on being a further step for him to make, if you like. So there was the initial breakthrough into the team. That was a big step. But then he became a regular sort of the season before last, which was a great recovery on the back of that serious injury he'd suffered. And then last season was an interesting one because I think he played potentially more games than he ever had, but he did have to settle for more of that role off the bench for a lot of the campaign. And so I just wonder whether this is the season when he can really cement that place as a regular starter. I mean, you have to work out the logistics of it in the sense that there are a lot of good players competing for, a limited number of spaces. But for me, particularly in the sort of final quarter or third of the campaign just gone, every time he was on the pitch, Harvey Elliott looked like one of the real difference makers. He looked like someone who you wanted to get the ball to make things happen, which is, I think, a sort of new level of responsibility that hadn't been on his shoulders before. I mean, I think for me, I can see him stepping up and maybe even challenging for that right-sided midfield role on a more regular basis. What do you make of his prospects going into the new campaign?
I think he's a perfect example, really, of someone who benefited a lot, as you say, from having those minutes coming off the bench earlier. And then as the season progressed, he was getting maybe a few more starts and was becoming a bit of a key player. But he was almost the reverse of Szoboszlai, where the first half of the season was a little bit slower and then it got better and better as he got more into the team. And I just think it's a classic example, really, of how you've got to manage these players and not overplay them. Szoboszlai, Curtis Jones to a certain extent. Even McAllister had a period where he was out, I think, at one stage where he was basically overplayed to a point because Liverpool didn't really have a great deal of other options in that position. So it's just an example, really, of what can happen. We know how talented all of these players are. I'd put Jones in the same sort of category as Harvey Elliott, really. Obviously plays on the opposite side of that midfield three, but both of them really creative, really work hard and put a shift in for the team defensively. Very, very intelligent in terms of the pressing and all of the off-the-ball stuff. Defensively, you'd have no real concerns. I don't think there might be, 1 or 2 games a season where, a Man City or an Arsenal away where you might want a bit more of a functional midfield. But I think we're probably beyond the point now where you'd look at Harvey Elliott as almost a luxury player in that midfield. I think he's definitely answered all of those questions. I think you're right to say that there's more steps to be taken. I think he can definitely get more goals and assists next season. That will be something that he looks at, and that was something that Curtis Jones spoke about a year ago of wanting to take the next step. Obviously didn't quite happen, but did to a certain extent. I think Elliott has certainly got that in his locker as well. It's just a case, really, of making sure that I'd rather have half of Elliott and Jones's games being starts and half of them being substitute appearances. If you get really high quality minutes when they're on the pitch rather than, flowing them too hard and then, second half of the season they drop off or whatever it might be. It's a really tricky balance to get right, but I think Liverpool are very much, they've got the options now in midfield to be able to manage them sensibly again. And I'm not saying that Harvey Elliott will be, super sub for the rest of his career, but it definitely did him a lot of good last season, I would say.
Yeah, and always a balance, of course, when players sort of establish this reputation as a super sub, because, of course, that does mean they're knocking on the door for starts, but at the same time, managers are going to be reluctant to almost sacrifice that super sub because it's so hard to influence games in any way as a coach, really. Once kickoff has happened and the game's underway, there's really only so much you can do from the sidelines. You're more or less relying on your substitutes. So if you have someone with that track record of coming on, making a decisive impact, then it takes a brave coach to stop using them as a sub in a way, I suppose. But yeah, I think you make a good point in terms of the balance and the minutes. Like you say, we talk about it every time, but there's certainly nothing wrong with having a large squad, especially with the fixture congestion only going in one direction as the football calendar evolves. And I think as well with Slot, that's one of the things I'm most interested about with him, because as you sort of alluded to earlier, with that kind of reputation at Feyenoord for managing minutes and things like that, I'll be very interested to see how he uses substitutes, because Klopp, of course, last season was by far and away the best in the league at getting goals and assists from the bench. So it's big shoes to fill, but you sense that, at times in Klopp's career, there have been questions over when he makes the substitutes. People have sometimes, historically going back, saying he maybe left it a bit late. And I think with Slot, you do see that sort of willingness to not just go to the subs, but go quite early. I think, to be fair to Klopp, we did see that later in his Liverpool reign, and that's maybe reflected in the record for subs last season. But I've always been an advocate for using your squad, especially when you are a club like Liverpool. The sort of advent of 5 substitutes as well, it, in theory, gives bigger teams that sort of greater advantage. I mean, you'll remember when the debate was raging at the time, and Klopp sort of came to blows with some of the managers lower down the league. But 5 subs is here to stay now, and Liverpool might as well use them, and use them in a way that gives players a genuine chance to impact proceedings. So I think, yeah, as you say, whether Elliott's starting or whether he's coming off the bench, there should be plenty of chances to take that next step. But I think, if I remember rightly, your second player to watch could have something to say about it to a certain extent, because he's going for the same position, isn't he?
Yeah, I mentioned him briefly before, Dominik Szoboszlai. I think he's a player that is a little bit unfortunate in that I think if his first and second half of last season had been swapped over, we'd be a lot more excited about him now. I think the only concern that I have about him really is just he looked exhausted by the end of last season, or not even by the end, to be honest. It was more a case of, by the other side of Christmas, it just looked a little bit like he'd almost lost his legs a little bit. I think we saw that a little bit at Euro 2024 as well. Didn't look particularly sharp and particularly healthy in terms of his fitness levels and his energy levels. That's obviously a huge part of his game and a huge part of why Liverpool bought him. So I'd like to hope that in the short time that he's had off, he's obviously back in training already this week, so he's not had long really in terms of the summer. He will have had a couple of weeks before the Euros and then maybe 2 or 3 afterwards. But you'd just like to see, I think, the energy levels restored within his game, because it's easy to forget because it was a little while ago now, but I think that the first half of last season, or certainly the first 2 or 3 months in particular that he was at Liverpool, I think you could see a lot of why they bought him, how he was going to fit in. Some spectacular goals, I think almost similar to Harvey Elliott, really, in that you'd expect to see that go up a level as well. Obviously, it's great if you can score 30-yard goals and sensational strikes, but it's also good to maybe just knock in 1 or 2 of the easier ones as well. I think he can definitely be a player that has the potential to be a nailed-on starter for Liverpool and can go up another level. But I'm just really fascinated to see what he looks like in terms of his fitness and his sharpness this summer, because I don't know about you, but I almost felt sorry for him at times last season, particularly when he came back from that injury. He just didn't really look particularly sharp. So that's what I'm watching out for, really. I think this summer is just, we know how good he is technically. We know what he can bring to the Liverpool team. It's just a case of, has he been replenished sufficiently that he can go on and kick on again, ready to start it all over again a year on from signing?
Yeah, the summer has very much flown by. It is just a smidge over 3 weeks since he went out of Euro 24 with Hungary. I had a quick look today because I wondered if Liverpool had sort of changed the amount of time players got off after internationals. I thought it can't have been 3 weeks, can it? But sure enough, it is still 3 weeks. But yeah, it's not long, is it, when you consider he's been playing football for pretty much the rest of the calendar year. So it's a tough ask for players, as we mentioned with the calendar. There's just so much football. It is pretty relentless. He's had those 3 weeks, so time will tell whether that was sufficient to really recharge the batteries. We certainly hope so, because I'm inclined to agree with you. I think when he does look fully sharp, fully fit, he looks like an incredible player. He can do it all. It's another one where you sort of look at the different departments of what you want from a midfielder, and there's nowhere that really springs to mind where he comes up especially short. So yeah, he's an exciting prospect. I suppose another thing is whether he could be one who slightly benefits from the change of manager. I'm always hesitant to make this point with anybody because, as we all know, Jurgen Klopp is one of the great coaches of the generation. He's, whoever comes in is going to be an inferior coach. I don't think that's unfair to Arne Slot to say. I think he'd probably agree that at this moment in time he has a lot more to prove in his coaching career. But I think with Szoboszlai, it's interesting that when he looked at his best was those first few weeks. I think you're right that it was mostly fitness-related stuff that saw him maybe fade away a bit, but you also do have to look at the sort of instructions he was getting. You wonder whether that almost uninhibited version of Szoboszlai was the one that was so exciting for those first couple of months. And then that's not to say that Klopp inhibited him, or at least if he did, it was for the good of the system, for the good of the team. But you wonder if maybe there's a tweak in the Slot system that lets him off the leash a little bit. Of course, we talked about how the 4-2-3-1 is something of an elusive concept, but the fact that people often sort of thought of Feyenoord as playing that way maybe shows you that one of those midfielders in the number 8 roles did get a reasonable amount of freedom to kind of push on at various passages in the game, whether Szoboszlai would be that player or whether it would be Jones, Elliott, who was playing that role. Time will tell, I suppose. But yeah, he has a lot of those traits that you can get really excited about. So yeah, I definitely agree. One to watch for sure. I suppose before we move on from him, we've briefly talked about before the idea that he could have other positions in the locker. Do you think there's any discussion to be had there? I mean, I know that at Hungary level, he's sometimes played as the number 6. I can't say I've ever been on that particular bandwagon, and I think even the Hungary boss kind of said, yeah, that didn't work as well as I'd hoped a couple of times after trying it. But there's that possibility, and then also I think this was talked about, and I was one of the ones who did talk about it more at the start when he was looking so kind of explosive, but the possibility that he could almost take over from Salah in a way, in the sense that we saw at Leipzig, he played that narrow winger kind of role for them. I think even last season he did clock one of the fastest speeds in the Premier League, so he does have that explosiveness, if you like. We know that Slot liked that from a winger, and with the squad being as it is, with a lot of depth in midfield and not much on that right wing, do you think it's something that could be looked at, or do you think probably not on the whole?
Well, just in terms of the midfield and playing deeper on that first, I agree with you there. I think I was in Hungary to watch him play in March, I think it was, when they played against Turkey, and you could see he was kind of playing as a number 6, but he was basically just wherever the ball was. He would take the ball off the goalkeeper, play a pass, and then pop up in the centre of the pitch, and then play another pass, and then be the man to have the shot at the end. So he was kind of doing the all-action, everything all at once type thing, which I think in some ways can be beneficial to a Liverpool midfield. The number 8 job is basically a little bit of everything, isn't it? It's very, very defensively important, but also you've got to create and do all the other things. So I don't necessarily think that that's a bad thing. But in terms of him playing out wide, I think it's something that I would definitely be open to seeing happen. It's just a case of, will it happen often enough, or will it be, I think we saw it. It possibly might have been the Aston Villa game where he came on at the back end of last season, played off the left wing for a bit. It feels like something that we might see for an odd 10 minutes here and there, just to give another player a rest, or just to fill in a little bit of a gap, depending on how many minutes each player needs to play. If there's just a way of giving somebody that extra 10 minutes off, it might be something that you'd look at then. But I think for it to be a real option in terms of Mohamed Salah succession planning for the long term, and could Szoboszlai become that kind of player for Arne Slot, I think you'd have to see it a little bit more sustained, and you'd have to see it be something that was just in practice from the start, full 90 minutes for a couple of months, to really see if that was going to work. And I just don't really think that is realistic to happen, if nothing else, really, because of the other options that Liverpool have got. I think he definitely can do it, but I would, for example, if you had Harvey Elliott and Szoboszlai in the same team, I think I'd probably go with Elliott on the right for that left-footed option and then Szoboszlai in midfield rather than the other way around. Obviously, they can switch and it can be a little bit more fluid maybe than what it has been in the past. I think that's certainly something to watch out for as well in terms of Arne Slot's tactics. I think it might be, the players swap over for a few minutes and things like that. But I'd like to see it tried. I just don't know whether that's something that's realistic really for Liverpool. When you think of all the other decisions that they've got to make, I think that would be quite a bold move to make, even though he has kind of done it before, but maybe not for a sustained period of time.
Yeah, one that we'll probably get an indication sooner rather than later if it is something on the mind of Arne Slot as a project he really wants to commit to, because if that's the case, you'd imagine we might see bits and pieces of it in pre-season now that, as we mentioned, Szoboszlai is back with the team. But finally, my last one to watch, and one I'm probably one of the most excited about for anyone this season, is Cody Gakpo. Matt can back me up here. I was saying it before the Euros, so I'm not just jumping on that particular bandwagon, but certainly it's enhanced my excitement for it. It's just the position question. We're asking it with every player, and I suppose the question with him is whether he will get that left wing berth. We've seen how effective he's been there at the Euros. Slot, of course, has seen it firsthand in the Eredivisie. Do you think it's going to be a case of, right, that's it, he's moving, or do you think we're going to see him in a variety of positions as we kind of have throughout his Liverpool career so far?
Yeah, it's tricky, isn't it? I mean, Arne Slot was asked about it and he didn't really give anything away. I can understand that there's a bit of a conversation to be had with the player. I think Cody Gakpo has spoken himself about it whilst he's been away actually over the summer, and said that he feels a lot more natural to play off that left side. That's where Liverpool have obviously scouted him and decided that he was a player that they wanted to bring in. His numbers were excellent for PSV off that side, and I do think it's a little bit strange that we've not really seen it for Liverpool. I know, obviously, that the reasons for that essentially is that they've got other players who can do that as well. But I think what we have seen from him, certainly in a Holland shirt, and I think in parts for Liverpool, when he's looked at his most comfortable, you think of his best performances really for Liverpool have come when he's most confident and when he's able to express himself, almost a little bit like what we were saying about some of these other players to watch. It's almost getting them into an environment where they feel that they can do the most creative things and do what comes naturally to them. And I think you would see a better version of Cody Gakpo off the left. It's more a case of, is it going to happen often enough? Is it going to be that he's going to play off the left one time and then maybe go into the centre? I'd like to see it be just that it was the case that he is the left winger and he is the one that gets that position. But then I suppose that will depend on how much does Darwin Núñez improve? Can Diogo Jota stay fit? If Núñez is out of the team because he's not performing well and Diogo Jota's got a 3-month injury, suddenly then you've got yourself into a position where you maybe need Cody Gakpo to play down the middle. So it'll depend, I think, on outside factors a little bit. But if it was me going into this season, as we've said a number of times on here, I think if you've got Gakpo and Diaz off the left, Salah off the right, and then Jota and Núñez through the middle, I think that's a nice balance really to have. You'd like one more to just sort of even it out across those forward positions, but I'd really like to see Cody Gakpo play off that left-hand side, because he feels a bit like one of those players where if you can get him playing there and you can get him confident and you can get him into a little bit of a run of momentum, I think that the goals and the assists can come. And I certainly think there's a higher ceiling in terms of those numbers compared to Luis Diaz. I think both of them very, very good players and offer things to Liverpool that Arne Slot will like and Jurgen Klopp has liked in the past. But I think if you have the best season of Diaz and the best season of Gakpo off that left-hand side, I suspect that Cody Gakpo's goal output and assist output would be just that little bit higher. So I think that's the way I'm leaning, but I'm sure during pre-season we'll start to get a few hints in terms of that. Obviously, once the 3-week period is up and Gakpo is back, which again is interesting. Obviously, Diaz in the same position, having got to the Copa America final. There's not a huge amount of time really to make that decision in, but it shouldn't be a massive issue, I don't think, for Gakpo. He's obviously done that before, and I think that would be, if I had to guess what team Liverpool would put out in a month's time against Ipswich, I would go with Gakpo off the left, but I don't know. It'll be interesting to see what happens.
Yeah, it would be tricky for Slot to kind of avoid all of the players who have been coming back late in the front line, because most of them will be arriving late. Salah, basically the only senior player back in the front line now, having only had World Cup qualifiers with Egypt. The others are all, I think, still delayed. Jota should be back soonest, having gone out with Portugal. But yeah, it won't be long between all of the remaining senior strikers. There have been reports that Arne Slot has taken a bit of a liking to Harvey Blair, which is a name we've not heard for a little while. He did get his debut under Jurgen Klopp, but we've not seen him in a couple of years, really. But that'll be interesting to see if he gets any chances in pre-season. I think he's still only 20, so one to watch there as well. Maybe a bit of a wild card one. I'll give you the chance to throw any sort of wild card names at me before we finish, Matt. Just no need to go into deep discussion with anyone else, but any other names you'll sort of give honourable mentions to as ones to keep an eye on?
Yeah, I mean, just continuing on the theme of young players, really, I think Bobby Clark is one that I've spoken about loads of times. I just love watching him, and there will be, I think, minutes for him if he does stick around. It'll be interesting to see what happens in terms of, potential loan for him. I know there is interest from various places, and there is a little bit of a decision to be made with him. Similar with Ben Doak and Kate Gordon as well. I think they'll be really interesting, and probably the one that almost should have picked really is Stefan Bajcetic. I think is one that I think will be really interesting to see where he's at this summer, because I think he is so good that if during this pre-season period he does look back to where he was sort of 12 months ago, I think that could potentially be the solution to the number 6 that gets talked about a lot. So yeah, I don't want to put too much pressure on all of those lads, but I think those are the ones I think to look out for, who are sort of 20 and under, if you like.
Yeah, been a bit of a manic morning at Liverpool.com, scrambling to work out what's going on with Lenny Yoro, with Manchester United seemingly making progress there. So perhaps if I'd had a little more time, then Bajcetic would also have been a name that came to my mind. I'm fully in agreement with you there. It could be very interesting to see what kind of season he has, particularly as if he can have that kind of almost re-breakthrough, if you like, then Liverpool may even have solved that number 6 issue, because he did look that good when he came in and basically ousted Fabinho from the team before those injury issues hit. So certainly an exciting one to watch. But soon you can stop listening to us talking and you can actually watch these players in action. It's not far away now, pre-season, and then of course the season proper. Not long to wait, but in the meantime, we will keep you covered with all of the latest news and all of the opinion that goes with it. So please do stick around on the Blood Red channel, where we'll have lots more content for you. Go over to Liverpool.com, where you can get all of your written content needs served. And in the meantime, thank you very much for watching.